Okay, let me tell you how our time together will be spent. First, I'll introduce our panel. Then we'll ask you all a few questions because they want to know who's going to be here asking them questions. And then I'll ask them some questions, and then we will open it up for Q&A. And then we will stick around at the end if you have any other things you would like to talk with us about. So first off, welcome everybody. Welcome to Global Entrepreneur Week. This is the best week of the year, isn't it? Like, I don't work here or anything, I'm just saying it's my favorite week. So many great sessions and great opportunities to learn and connect with each other. So enjoy the heck out of all of it. My name is Kelly Burns, and I am the founder and CEO of Voyage Consulting Group. And I'm also one of the leaders of the Kansas City AI Club, which is excited to be here to talk with you about AI and all the things law. But we have our legal experts here. So let me introduce our panel. So let's see, on the end is Maggie Mannenbach, and she is the intellectual property attorney. Anybody have IP with your businesses? Right? Yeah. Okay, Maggie has a background in civil engineering, and she merges her passion for technology and the law to help clients achieve their goals. She assists clients with a wide range of intellectual property needs, and her JD and bachelor's are both from GEWKC, and she was summa cum laude, so we have brainiacs up here. So welcome, Maggie. Amandeep Kaur is our next one. She is our corporate attorney. With all of these three are with Hush Blackwell, so they are sponsoring this panel and your lunch, free lunch on Hush Blackwell. Don't say the lawyers never gave you anything. Amandeep focuses on corporate law, assisting clients with mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, and other transactions. Anybody think that could be in your future? Of course. Her JD and her bachelor's are from the University of Oklahoma. So welcome, Amandeep. And Allison Minicki is next. She is labor and relations attorney. A self-proclaimed theater kid with a passion for school and learning. She grew up with a love of reading, writing, and problem solving. Perfect for an attorney, right? She's labor and relations law, so it's a natural fit for her. And her JD is from the University of Mississippi School of Law, also summa cum laude, and let's see, yep, and her BA is from Missouri State in English literature. So welcome to our panel. Thank you all for joining us and for being part of Global Entrepreneur Week this week. Okay, let's meet the audience. How many of you, this is your first time coming to Global Entrepreneur Week? Ah, woo! Put it on your schedule every year. This is like my fourth or fifth one. I don't know. I'm an entrepreneur too, so very excited. Okay, where are you in your entrepreneurial journey? So, and obviously some of you could have more than one company going, right? Or ideas for more than one. Anybody in the ideation stage? Pre-launch, haven't launched? Couple people. What about in the launch phase? Awesome. What about scaling up? How many of you are scaling up? Okay, looks like the most there. Anybody in a mature business or getting ready to think about exiting? No, I don't see any hands up for that. Okay, so we've got a few in the ideation, more in launch, and most in scaling up for us today. And then let's talk about your employee size. So how many of you are your sole entrepreneurs right now? Okay, that's going to be the most. Anybody have 1 to 10 employees beyond yourself? Okay, how about up to 25, 11 to 25? And then 26 to 50? Anybody more than 50? Those are the ones that already scaled up and are getting ready to exit, right? They're in the mature stage. Okay, so most are solopreneurs or 1 to 10 employees. How many of you use AI now in your business or for strategy? Ah, that's awesome. Okay, that was a lot of hands. So how many of you have an AI policy? Ah, we're just kind of winging it still. I know, I'm an entrepreneur too. Policy. Okay, and then how many of you have questions on your mind already for this legal panel? Did you come in with some questions? Okay, well, you might have some as we go. I'm going to ask the panel some questions about IP and labor and relations and corporate law. We'll ask a few questions, and whoever I ask the question to, you can answer as well if you're not asked. And then we'll just ask a few and go a couple rounds, and then we'll open it up for questions. All right, how's that sound? Everybody ready? All right, so you can eat your lunch while I'm asking them some questions. Okay, my first question is, when did you start using AI, and what was your first use of it? And we'll start down at the end with Maggie.
Well, let's see. I did really not at all use AI in school. So that was not something that I was exposed to early on. It was honestly, and I was never somebody that was on the early forefront of ChatGPT or anything else. And so my real first exposure and use has honestly been at work and using it in my career. And I really still don't even use it that much personally, but Hush is a very, very big advocate and proponent and is very much supporting the growth in AI. And so, which is part of the reason why, we're participating today. So mine is relatively limited outside of the workplace.
Thanks, Maggie. Amity?
I would agree with Maggie. I didn't really use it in school that much, and it wasn't something that a lot of emphasis was put on. But I use it a lot more in my career now within the corporate realm, and especially in mergers and acquisitions. We do a lot of diligence work, and AI has significantly helped kind of refine the diligence process for us. So Hush Blackwell really puts an emphasis on using AI tools within that process.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, same as Amandeep and Maggie. I didn't use it in school, but definitely as I've started at Hush in the past few years, we've been getting a lot different tools, whether it be for legal research, which it's always a great starting point. There's a lot of tools out there to help you kind of launch your legal research for any jurisdiction or anything like that, which is really helpful, as well as we have some internal systems as well. We have one called Prompt Composer that really helps with either summarizing like a deposition. And so I use that a lot of times, like if I do a lot of internal investigations. And so I'll upload my notes into our system, which is secure, it's within the firm, and it'll summarize the key points of the investigation, which is really helpful, especially when you're disseminating your notes to other attorneys or to the client.
Very good. Thank you very much. And doesn't it feel like AI just burst onto the scene last year? It was about 2 years ago that ChatGPT was released, November of 22. But all of a sudden, we started hearing about it last year, and you were already out of school and into your careers. But did anybody else start using it more in the last year? Right. And then did anybody else have a feeling I did when I started hearing more about it? And I thought, some of this is robotics from high school, isn't it? So it doesn't have to be so scary. And hopefully our conversation will help make it less scary. And it feels good that even lawyers are using it. So it must be A-okay. Okay, I'm going to start with a question for Allison. And are any of you, some of you have employees. Do any of you think you will have employees? You might have some, and managing employees, leading, managing their performance, all of those things. So with the rise of AI tools for recruitment and performance management, what legal risks should employers be aware of when using AI for hiring, promotion, and termination?
So that's definitely something we're seeing clients struggle with as AI becomes more prominent, especially when you are using AI to either screen applicants or, like you said, make employment decisions. We're concerned about, because you are still an employer, and as an employer, depending on your size, you'll have the Title VII, which is employment discrimination. You'll have the Americans with Disabilities Act and all these state equivalents, and you want to make sure that the way that you are screening and the way that you're using AI is not adversely impacting protected groups and inadvertently screening out people on the basis of a protected characteristic. And the real concern with that with employers is, even though it's the AI or it's the vendor that is making these analyses, you as the employer are going to be on the hook for any discrimination claims that may arise out of that. So you really, it's kind of twofold. You really, if you are going to use AI, you really have to use your due diligence with the vendor and make sure you understand their processes and how their algorithm has come to be and how they're screening applications, because you're really going to be on the hook in the future, whether it's an applicant or it's an employee, if someone is screened out because of that. And the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has made it part of their strategic plan for the next few years to really focus on the biases in AI and making sure that employers are being compliant with that. So that's really a huge thing of making sure that your AI is not in any way perpetuating bias or excluding people on the basis of a protected characteristic, which could make you liable for employment discrimination.
Okay, we've got 2 on the hooks and a libel. Did you get that? That's serious, right? So how can a company verify or check for biases?
Yeah, so it's really, you have to be intentional and you have to be knowing what you're looking for. So for example, if there's an AI that is screening out someone with more than 6 months of a gap in their resume, on its face, that seems neutral, but there could be someone who is out for 6 months due to an illness, due to a disability, and that would be screening them out improperly. So it's really about, again, doing your due diligence with the vendor, asking the vendor these questions on how they've created this, and then also going back and making sure that you're checking. And it also helps to have some sort of disclosure, whether on your website or for your application, that AI is being used. And if you need a reasonable accommodation as per under the ADA to maybe complete this, that you notify us as well. So having that kind of fail-safe of we are available if you need an accommodation to do this, because not just employees are covered under the ADA, applicants are as well.
Nice, that's a really good tip. Put that if you need accommodation on the website for the application process. Excellent. What about any other regulations, laws? Are there any on the books? They're coming soon that entrepreneurs should be aware of that could affect their HR-related practices?
Yeah, so obviously, just the regular employment discrimination laws, it applies regardless of whether you're using AI. But the EEOC has released some regulations and guidance, and while that's not binding, it gives you a good idea of what best practices are and what the EEOC expects employers to be complying with. So while those aren't necessarily binding in what is required, it's a good guidepost for maybe where the laws are going in the future.
Okay, very good. Keep our eyes on that, right, folks? Okay, I'm going to turn to Maggie, and let's talk about AI and IP. AI companies develop AI technologies. How can they protect their intellectual property? What specific challenges are you seeing with IP ownership, particularly regarding AI-generated content and inventions?
Yeah, and I guess I'll take a poll here so then I don't get into the weeds of something that may not be relevant for people. But does anyone in the room have any are they in the technology space or have something that they believe could be patentable? Okay, so we do have some people. So I can kind of touch on that too. And so she kind of mentioned IP ownership in AI. And I think the biggest concern and the biggest issue from the get-go that you have to be sure of is who's going to own something that's created by AI. And so you have to ask yourself, what are you using AI to create? And so far in the IP world, which IP essentially falls into 4 different categories, and we'll mostly focus on 2-ish, 3 today. Patents, which is any type of invention. Trademarks, which typically goes to logos, branding, that type of thing. Copyrights, and trade secrets. And AI so far in terms of ownership has really only affected patents and copyrights. So if you've got some type of invention, that'll be something that is patentable that you register with the USPTO, the Patent and Copyright Office, or Patent and Trademark Office. And then copyrights, which is literally any tangible medium of expression. So anything that you publish, it could be words, art, music, anything, that will fall into copyright. And so right now, the law currently states that anything that is created by AI cannot be a copyrightable invention. So for something to have copyright protection, it has to have a human author. For patents, in order to be patent eligible, there has to be a natural person, so a human, that made a significant contribution to the invention. And so with patents, you have a little bit more of leeway into if you ever want to obtain patent protection, which in terms of valuation for at least businesses in the tech space adds a lot of value, and investors look at that pretty favorably. But you have to be sure that from the get-go, if you're using AI to create anything in connection with your business, there needs to be that human element to it. Now, on the copyright space, so if let's say you're using AI to create maybe business manuals or something that you're publishing in connection with your business, you just need to know that, those things technically you don't have any actual authorship over those. And so that's still being litigated. It's probably going to change in the next couple years, only because it's so new to the law right now. But that is essentially the biggest concern, I guess, in those two spaces. Another concern with anything that you are creating that is essential to your business that you might be putting in through AI. So let's say you have a trade secret, something that's proprietary to you, holds a lot of value. If you are putting that into any type of open source AI, so like a ChatGPT, that no longer has any tangible secrecy to it because you're putting it into basically the public domain. And so if you are, have any confidential information, any client information, customer information, anything that is proprietary or confidential, you need to exercise a lot of caution and to make sure that you are not putting anything into the public domain, because once you do, there's a lot of just confidentiality risk associated with that. And then also, whatever that output is too, it may now be tainted necessarily by the public domain. So I think there's one example that we've read about where some engineers at Samsung actually put in some software code into ChatGPT to try and solve an error, and it basically resulted in a data breach, a data leak. And I know at Hush, we kind of talked about, Allison mentioned earlier, we have Prompt Composer, which is basically our own in-house version of ChatGPT that the firm created that is a closed circuit so that we are not breaching any obligations of confidentiality with clients. And so I cannot emphasize enough that just be so careful with what you put into anything if you're operating with a ChatGPT. Now, on the other hand, if you're using some type of AI tool that, let's say, is you're licensed to use, it's important to just know what that AI company, how they are training their model, or what are they using as inputs to train the model. And so, because a lot of times too, the biggest concern is you put something into AI and you get this output, but you don't know what that AI model used to basically determine your output. And so the biggest issue, and I guess another more clear-cut example, is with the New York Times is currently suing OpenAI because OpenAI is using the New York Times articles without their permission, and they're and suing for copyright infringement. And so a lot of times now the issue with AI models is that they're not asking for permission to use the data that they're using to create their models. And so there's a lot of, just licensing risk involved with that as well. So that was maybe a little bit of a ramble, but that covered, I think, a good breadth of the different spaces.
There was a lot of good advice in there. And you're familiar with ChatGPT, right? That whatever you put in there becomes part of how they're training the whole system, the whole model. And they said that they're not doing that anymore. So I don't know those people. Facebook says they're all honest and all about kids too, and there's no way I trust them. So that's, just be extra careful about what you put in, and just assume that what you put in is going to become used for, in those open systems, will be used for to train the model for other people to use as well. I do see a hand up. Do you have a question relevant to this? So the question is that she's a fine artist, and so is there any way to use AI without having what you use put in there? So
The short answer is, unfortunately, at this point, it's kind of a whack-a-mole, really, because there's nothing that you can do, right, to prevent somebody from taking maybe something that's published online. And with certain AI companies, we still don't even know because of just the breadth of AI tools and how they are training models and what data they're using. So long story short is no, and it's a matter of also sometimes being diligent And I know that there's already like litigation that exists that talks about these artists who are basically like verbatim having things copied from their works, and it's being published because somebody used AI, and AI is still not refined enough to not just copy and paste. And so it's a matter of kind of honestly exercising your own diligence at this point.
Her follow-up question is that there is a movement among the artists to protect their work. And so she's asking if that is going to have an impact.
I think it's kind of and this is just a, more personal take than anything based on what I've seen so far and with clients that we work with, is it really is kind of a cost-benefit analysis for you, right? And so what risks are you willing to take at the expense of, potentially having something be put into the AI model? And, to what extent you restrict that is, the risk that you put in, preventing the growth of your business. So at this point, until there's, further law in place, further case law in place, your own personal ways of kind of guarding against it are pretty much just the risk versus the benefit.
I was going to say, put really bad ideas in there, and then your competitors will do those, or your artists. But did you see where the sculpture, there's an artist making a sculpture, and the artist is not real, it's a robot. And so who owns that is ChatGPT, I think they're saying, owns that. Or whatever the program is. I think it was ChatGPT. But yeah, so you don't want to put anything that could be, that you would feel okay with losing. Don't put that in there. And that's artists or data, any client data. I think I'm a clever writer, so I even protect, like if I have some phrase or taglines or something, I don't put all that in there. And that's on the internet usually, so it could be taken anyway, but I'm extra cautious. Mm-hmm. So the question is about tools being created to prevent that. So the University of Chicago has one, is what she shared. And then what are the legal implications of using those tools to prevent getting in that first situation that we talked about?
So are you asking in the context of like universities using, or students? And to download, and it basically... which also, I mean, lots of implications with that, because then that inherently will make AI models less accurate. Which, I mean, that is typically a preventative measure. Again, there's no really true law, statutory law or case law yet on AI, and so that's why, I mean, this is also a gray area, even for us when we practice. And I feel like just even in the last year, like incorporating new language that accounts for either saying, one, hey company, you're not going to use AI with anything that we do with you, or if you do use AI, you're going to make sure that all of the data that you use to put into your model was ethically sourced, and that you have all the permissions you need to be putting that data and then running our information that we give you through that model. And so up until this point, doing something like that, there's not really anyone to stop the other person in one way or the other. So
thank you.
yes.
Okay, I'll take one more question here and then we'll move on. Yeah.
For copyright and patent, there's a definition around human contribution. So for instance, if you're using AI to create content, how much of that content do you need to contribute in order for you to be able to copy?
Yes, and there is.
Let me share the question just to make sure everybody could hear. This one, the question is about copyright and how much of the copy does a human have to have written in order for the human to legally copyright it and it not to belong to the AI tools?
Yes, and there is case law. It exists. It's come out in the last, I think, 2 years. I could not tell you off the top of my head what the definition of significant contribution is, but it is out there if you were to look it up. But that said, the Patent Office also does not require you to disclose that you used AI to make an invention, which is, could obviously change in the next few years, also depending on how case law develops. But they do have a defined definition for what is considered a significant contribution. But again, it's a very up to interpretation definition when you see it. So, because, it's pretty arbitrary what one person might consider significant versus another.
So hurry up and get all your articles and IP done, so before all the laws come in and take it away. I put in something for whatever my request was, and then I asked ChatGPT to quote the sources. And so it quoted the source of Harvard Business Review, which I read frequently. So the URL looked real. It was the same pattern as all the other ones for HBR, but when I looked at it, copy and pasted it, it really didn't exist. So you need to do serious due diligence on the sourcing of the output that you receive. Let's move over to Amandeep and take a few questions related to corporate. So what do founders that have leveraged AI need to consider when raising capital? Anybody in here going to do that? Raise capital or in the process? Okay, that's another component of this. So what do founders need to consider related to AI for that?
Yeah, I think in terms of raising capital, but just generally as practice, Kelly made a joke about this earlier, but making sure you have a proper policy in place as to how the AI is being used within your business model, to what extent it's being used, what safeguards you have to monitor it, who the actual ownership of the AI is. All those items need to be delineated and very specifically clarified. So then when you go out and you raise capital, all investors will ask about it. They'll ask if you're using it, because certain investors are still a little bit more hesitant in allowing AI-backed startups to even fund them, because there's so much like the lack of law and clarity as to how the future of AI will look. So that is the first question they'll ask you, is like how you're using AI, what policies do you have, what safeguards do you have. Cybersecurity is another big issue, just with any kind of software like this. And so again, they'll ask you what policies you have to safeguard that. So I think as a overarching theme, it's important to make sure your corporate governance of the AI tools is just very refined and tied up. So whenever anyone asks you about it, you have very clear instructions on how AI is being implemented in your business.
And that's important for you to be consistent if you're a solopreneur, but also when you're working with suppliers, vendors, and contractors too, that you train them on what your policy is. So whether they tell you they're using it or not, but that they will follow your policy.
Oh, sorry. Just another general suggestion is make sure you tell them you're using AI. I think we see that sometimes where we start doing diligence and we run into issues where like, where is this information coming from? Or like, how is this, how did this come about or whatever? And sometimes it'll be simply that neither party has clarified the implications of using AI within their business. So just make sure that's like very clearly laid out, because you could have certain liabilities in the post of it if you don't specify that.
And that's my next question. So given the complexities and the potential unpredictability of AI, what legal strategies can our companies use to limit the liability, especially if the AI system makes an erroneous or harmful decision?
Yeah, I think on a base level, before you start using AI, you need to make sure that you either have an individual who's very well knowledgeable about the AI that you will be using. So they are running the compliance, the regulatory, the cybersecurity, that they are fully knowledgeable about all those implications. But secondarily to that, it kind of goes back to what corporate structure are you using? Are you using a limited liability company, which will safeguard you individually and maybe not your business, versus like a C Corp, which will have other liability implications? You can also build in to the governing documents of any of those entities certain provisions that will protect you and your business. So working with an attorney to make sure that you have proper safeguards in place that'll limit your liability. Additionally, there's recently we do a lot of RWI, or reps and warranty insurance deals, but in conjunction with that, we've been seeing a lot of AI insurance. So you can actually get business insurance for your AI tools. So if an unforeseen circumstance happens, you are protected. It's not money out of your pocket that's being gone.
Interesting. Okay, also one more for Amandeep. With the integration of AI into our core business functions, what are the responsibilities of founders and boards in overseeing the AI implementation, risk management, and ethical considerations?
Yeah, I think that kind of just goes back to the 2 points I made, like making sure you have a proper policy in place and then making sure all of your employees that are using AI are somewhat knowledgeable about how it is being used. That's just the overarching theme is you really need to be understanding how the AI is being utilized in your business and then making sure you are able to articulate that to other people so everyone is aware of the AI usage.
And that just reminded me too of reputation damage, even if it's not illegal, but reputation damage is something else. With Sports Illustrated, I think last year, do you remember that one? They posted articles by authors, and the authors didn't exist. They posted it from one of their suppliers or vendors posted these articles, and so it's really embarrassing for them. And now I damaged their reputation further by telling even more people. But they, it's kind of embarrassing that those authors aren't even part of Sports Illustrated. So, just when you use it, try to be honest in your usage too, and ethical in your usage. One more question for all three, and then I'll open it up for questions. So for all three, how do you foresee the legal landscape evolving around AI in the next few years? What are things that entrepreneurs can do now to prepare for the future, to future-proof their business and against any potential regulation changes or ethical considerations? Allison, do you want to start? We can go down the line.
Sure. So kind of keeping it tailored to the labor and employment space, I think we're going to see employers using AI more and more frequently, especially when you think of things like initial job screenings and things like that. But then we're also going to see employees of these employers using AI. And so I think the biggest thing that entrepreneurs can do to make sure that you're prepared and that you are limiting your liability as much as possible is to be doing your due diligence with whatever vendor you use to start screening for these applications or whatever HR decisions that you're making, as well as having internal policies about the use of AI, having your employees disclose when they've used AI. We've talked about that in different contexts, but it's important in your employment space as well. You can also have policies limiting employees' use of AI. That's kind of your prerogative in that sense as well. So you can kind of make those decisions about whether or not you want your employees to be able to use that. So kind of twofold in terms of one, make sure if you're going to use AI in hiring or in any decisions, making sure you're doing your diligence in that front to alleviate any potential discrimination concerns, but then also preparing for the inevitability of your, your employees using AI as well.
Thank you. Amandeep?
Yeah, I think from a corporate perspective, it's much more broad. Something we talk about is that AI isn't here to steal your job, but it's here to support you and make you do your job better. So I think in the future, that's just how I see it. Like, I see it as a supplement to all of our careers to make us more efficient and to make us do our work better. So I think that's just where I see the future of AI, and kind of like Allison already mentioned and we've talked about, is making sure we have very clear cut structure on how the AI is being used.
Thank you. And Maggie?
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway, and especially for early entrepreneurs from the IP perspective, is you just have to be so cautious with what you are putting into AI. Whether it's a trade secret that's fundamental to your business or it's confidential customer information. If you're using anything that's open source, you just risk a lot more exposure to liability, because pretty much once that information goes into anything that is publicly available, then it's no longer a secret and it's no longer confidential. And the same thing even goes where if you're using like subscribed proprietary AI tools, where let's say maybe you're paying a subscription, but it is worthwhile at this point to read the fine print just to know where they're getting the data for their models from, and are they getting the proper permissions, because there really isn't any federal comprehensive law yet, and I think IP law is going to change a lot in the next few years. And what's current today may not be current even 6 months from now. And so at this point, just exercising a lot of caution with how you're using AI, and what Amandeep alluded to earlier with AI policies, of just having clear policies in place so that also, as you're growing this business, you can point to these, specific rules that you're following to make sure that you also aren't, or that you are, complying and not breaking any, I guess, of your own internal rules, because investors do find that to be very important. And Amandeep and I work together all the time on deals, and anytime that there is software involved and companies are using AI, there's just a lot more questions that have to be asked. So doing that kind of, I guess, preemptive work on the front end saves a lot of work later on, and especially with how much AI is probably going to continue to change and develop over the next few years.
Thank you very much. Okay, I hope somebody took really good notes that you could send to me, because I'm up here listening and couldn't take notes on all the things that they said. So what questions do you have? What else would you like to know about? Yes.
So from a consumer perspective, like working with clients and customers, do you need to disclose if something is AI generated? Because I find AI generated fake, and I feel like because so many deepfakes or things, like I'll see a product and be like, I'm not sure if that was a real photograph, or there'll be a model who has a million people following her on Instagram but was completely AI generated and is a representation of a fit person but is not a real person. So are there consumer protection laws we have to follow, or things that we need to consider?
Not yet. And she kind of asking as a consumer, how should, and even working with businesses, should you disclose that you're using AI? Best practice would be yes, at all times, always disclose, because again, we just don't know what the law is going to be yet, and the law is playing catch up. And again, it's not required, and so I think that's on a broader scale of just society in general, being able to discern what's AI generated and what's not is already an issue today. And so from a business owner perspective, I think always, always, always disclose to a consumer if you're using AI, or if you do want to use their information and put it into an AI model, then you have to get that consent up front. And so obtaining the proper consents where it's, if you do want to use certain information that customers give you, that's fine, but you just need to make sure that you're obtaining their permission to do so.
Hey, and make sure if you're using AI to proofread, that you verify that too, a la Mattel's packaging on their dolls. So the Wicked dolls they had to take the Wicked dolls off the shelf because the packaging had a significant error in the website link. We'll come over here for a question. Yes.
On the flip side, if I'm using AI, which is open source, and therefore I cannot claim propriety to it, the trained model that I have used may have bias. Am I exposed to lawsuits because of the bias that I used from open source? Because that's not mine. Is the question clear?
Yeah. Repeat the question.
So if I use an AI model, and the AI model has been trained, and it's an open source, but that trained model has some bias in it, which is attracting lawsuit against me, am I held responsible for that?
So are you talking about like in what sort of context?
In healthcare, for example.
Sure. Yeah. So yes, at least from an employment discrimination side of things, the law has been very clear that even though this AI has created the bias for, if there was biased information that it was inputted and it's making its decisions based on this, yes, you are liable for the bias. I'm not sure in terms of expanding the scope on like different areas, but for example, we have seen examples in healthcare where AI is getting its data from, traditionally white female patients, or for example, like heart attack symptoms, we see white males, and the AI has learned that information and spits out biased information. And so yes, the people who utilize the AI are on the hook, even though it's the machine that created it.
And be careful of that for any uses that you use. You can't say, I advise this client of this to take this step or have a surgery or to follow this marketing strategy or build this product, I advise them, oh, but I got the answer from ChatGPT. Like, no, that'll get laughed out of court. Remember last year, one of the things that got my attention was the lawyer in New York I see some heads nodding, submitted a bunch of legal references to the judge, and they were all fake. And then, okay, so if you do that and you get caught, admit it quickly, right, and move on. He did not admit it. He was fighting it, saying that didn't happen. It wasn't really, but it was. So he looked even worse and got in big trouble for doing that. And obviously the client issue is one, but his job is in jeopardy as well.
Right, that's what I was going to bring up, because they were sanctioned by the court
Yes.
for not doing their due diligence and making sure that AI was giving them correct case citations.
Yeah, and wouldn't you want a refund if you paid them and all they did was look it up on ChatGPT? Okay, other questions for this? Yeah, Kim?
The short answer is yes, it's coming, but it is not necessarily clear yet. I think, and there is case law that talks about all of this, and there is actively still case law that is ongoing on, what constitutes something that, if you input a certain set of parameters into an AI model and it spits out an image, to what level of detail, because this is just a case that I read about that is getting litigated, of if you put in so many levels of details of how you want an image to, what you want the output to look like, and whether or not you put in enough detail to be able to say, well, this is an original work that was created by me, and I only used the AI model as a means to the end. But the fundamental level, it is still created by a human. And I think there is not a clear delineation yet, quite honestly, of what that looks like, and I think it will be coming. And unfortunately, that is most of my answers, quite honestly, is that it will depend, and it's still actively changing and ongoing. And even earlier, I think earlier this year in July, the Copyright Office kind of issued like a recommendation, basically, and they're taking input right now on, whether or not they are going to change their requirements of, what it takes for something to be registerable with the Copyright Office, and whether or not something created by AI, a human author can own. And I think it could change, it could not change, but I think in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be further developed. So it was a very lowly answer of saying that it will depend. Mm-hmm. 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 Yes, and I think there's also a clear difference between generative AI, and so something that is completely generated by AI, versus what you're talking about, which is almost like an AI Photoshop, is what it kind of sounds like, AI manipulation. And so in that case, it's definitely, this is a photo that was clearly created by a human, and tools are used. But I think the big kind of buzzword, even in the legal world, is this generative AI, where you're putting in an input and there is a completely new output that AI is creating for you.
Good, thank you. Yes, question?
We're getting into the weeds of patent law with this question.
And they're lawyers, so they're going to want you to use the lawyers.
The recommendation
Come to Hush Blackwell for your patent needs.
for all your IP needs. And with patent law, it's so much more niche. And I will say too, even from our perspective, like we utilize AI tools to even assist us. Because what I think you're asking is in terms of drafting patent applications. And this is not legal advice or recommendations, but what you're saying is that you can use AI to help draft. And even from the law firm side, the legal industry perspective, like that's already being done on our end, anyways. The biggest, where the AI becomes an issue is in terms of that inventorship. And is what you're referring to something that is quite literally an AI technology, or you're just using AI for an invention to help come up with ideas for an invention? So that's a differentiation too, because patenting AI technology is also kind of its own complete subset of, that is currently, AI inventions are just now hitting the Patent and Trademark Office and just now being issued as patents. And so even, how the Patent and Trademark Office treats AI technology is, actively changing under development. So, but to answer your question, it is okay that you are using AI to draft patent and and provisional, non-provisionals. But just again, using anything, like with anything that's open source, just be cautious of, public disclosures. So.
And all of this is not legal advice. That is no liability for us or these lawyers. Do we have a question over here?
Yeah, I was just wondering, a big takeaway is doing an AI policy, right? So a lot of us are small business, and so do you have any recommendations of where to go to look for good, solid examples of AI policies?
I can. Yeah, ChatGPT. No. Okay, I'm going to tell you something in confidence. So I'm releasing a book pretty soon, I call it an ebook, but it's like 60 pages. But there is bonus material, and there is a draft AI policy in the back. And so my background is as a head of HR and chief talent officer, also entrepreneur and all those things. But if you want to email me or connect, and if you put in the message or in an email to me that you were here at this panel today, not watching it later, but you're here in person, then it's not even up on Amazon yet or anything, but I will make that available to you.
I think generally
That's for anybody here, not just her.
I was going to follow up with that, but just generally, there are AI policies out there that you can look up just on the internet. What I would recommend is if you are kind of going that route, look at multiple of them and kind of pull multiple drafts and then tailor them to your specific business.
And that you would need to do that with the one I give you as well. Yeah. Okay, we probably have time for one or two more questions. Okay, yep. Did you hear the question? She contracts with a lot of writers, so is there a way to prove they didn't use AI?
I think typically a lot of times is, and this is what we even are starting to include in a lot of technology transactions that I work on, is on the front end, anytime you enter into an agreement with a writer, have them on the forefront sign, basically represent and warrant that they're not going to use any type of AI in order to do whatever project scope of work that they are being contracted to do. In terms of actually being able to detect it, that's kind of on the back end for you to determine. But if you put those contractual obligations in place on the front end to say, hey, you are contractually agreeing that you're not going to do this, that way, if you're having to act, later on and you find out that they breach those, you have a way of seeking recourse afterwards. And so in terms of, being able to ensure, it's really just, putting it in writing. And then being able to look back to that and say that, hey, you agreed to do this and you broke that contract. And so now I can seek damages from you. So.
Thank you very much. Is there any question over on this side?
So,
Okay.
he handed
I
me
don't
the
see any over
microphone,
here.
so I started talking. So this reminds me of HIPAA in healthcare, and one of the biggest impacts that we're seeing with AI is reading breast scans to cancers to everything else. where will this follow in changing AI? Do you see it impacting healthcare in a bigger way than HIPAA did?
My general thought, and even because even on a few transactions that we've worked on, where now, yeah, AI is just basically being implemented with all these different hospital systems, and AI is being used to synthesize patient data and analyze scans. And until there's really, I do think it will change, and I think until there's a comprehensive law that kind of talks about, requirements for hospitals, because the healthcare industry is so regulated, until there's more, I guess, regulatory law that expands on, what healthcare providers are and are not allowed to do. I think that will probably be coming, but at this time it's still so early on that I think a lot of times hospitals are trying to be proactive and trying to, make sure that they are getting those proper consents and saying, hey, we're going to use AI to provide you service, or we're going to use the data that you provide to us in an AI model. And that you're going to be okay with doing that. Or we're going to use your data to help train one of our models for something else. And so I think that's just the general trend right now with companies, is that they're trying to get ahead of it and asking for permission now for when inevitably they're required to get permissions. So.
I do have a comment on the healthcare sphere in general. We have a lot of labor and employment clients within the healthcare space. And something that we're seeing is this concern about certain agencies, federal agencies that oversee a lot of this healthcare development and AI might be slowing down and not necessarily keeping up with this because of the recent Chevron overturn in the Supreme Court. And if you all aren't familiar with that, which you probably aren't because you're not lawyers, but what happened was the Supreme Court overturned Chevron, and Chevron said that as long as these federal agencies, such as the DOL, FDA, have a reasonable interpretation of the law, judges will defer to them because they are the experts. Now that is out. That's not the standard anymore, and now it is up to each individual judge to interpret the law. So because courts aren't relying on that interpretation of these agencies as they used to, it's not going to really motivate these agencies to come up with these regulations around AI, because they're not going to be, you can still reference them in court, but they're not going to be deferred to as they once were. So we actually might be seeing kind of not as rapid of a use around all of that, just because of this delay and lack of motivation in coming up with regulations around there.
Interesting. So do all of you have something that you could do differently based on what they shared? Do you have something to follow up on, keep your eye on based on what they shared? Right, we all probably have that too. So how about a round of applause for our panel?